The waiter had just set down the ribeye when I felt the room thin around me. Crystal glassware chimed from other tables, a low hum of money and laughter under the chandelier's warm light. My father's cufflinks caught the glow like tiny mirrors as he leaned toward my brother, voice lowered just enough to feel private, not enough to be kind. "Your sister, she's worthless. She's done." The words floated across the mahogany like ice slid into a tumbler clean and merciless. My mother didn't flinch. She smoothed a napkin across her lap the way she smoothed every wrinkle life dared to show her. Jackson glanced down at his plate, then back at Dad and said nothing. "Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever sat at a table where your worth was measured, like the bill quiet itemized, and never enough tap the like button and share this with someone who will understand. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next." But to understand why that sentence cracked open my life, you need to know what passes for love in a house where the porch lights burn for neighbors and the kitchen lights burn for show. I grew up in a white trim colonial outside Boston where the lawn looked like it had been combed every morning. The porch swing never creaked because no one used it. We were a family of polished surfaces and straight lines of planners with tidy columns and calendars hung like commandments. My father Thomas built a career advising people how to feel safe about their money, which meant he never asked himself how to feel at all. My mother Eleanor could run a charity gala like a general planning a war. Seating charts, silent auctions, a smile fixed at just the right wattage. At our dinner table, the best story was the one with the biggest number. Jackson learned that early. He was 2 years ahead of me and carried the Caldwell name like a trophy held high. If achievement were a hallway, Jackson had every key. Prep school honors, Ivy League, the internship at Dad's firm where the interns wore suits sharper than knives. My father spoke to him in the round as if projecting to an audience portfolio deal flow carry. When he spoke to me, he asked about plans, and the question carried a weight that had nothing to do with curiosity. I wasn't empty of plans. I just liked color. As a kid, I filled sketchbooks with street corners, the florist window fogged by breath in February, the bus stop at dusk, when the sky went the color of a bruise. I brought a painting home once a city block, after rain sidewalks shining like held breath. Dad looked at it and said, "That's nice. Focus on skills that secure your future." Mom kissed my temple and signed me up for SAT prep. The painting dried on my desk and lost its shine. Compromise is a habit that presents itself as maturity. I picked marketing because it felt like creativity with a suit jacket on. I took a job at a boutique agency in the city close enough to the skyline to smell the harbor on windy afternoons. I learned how to turn a restaurant's slow lunch into a line out the door. I learned how to talk to a bakery owner about brand voice without making her feel like she'd been pushed into a meeting she didn't want. I came home with coffee on my cuffs and a satisfaction that didn't need applause to be real. The monthly Caldwell dinner, however, required more than real. It required performance. Harrington's was my father's stage of choice, a steakhouse where the wait for a regular reservation could stretch months, where the booths felt like little bank vaults lined in leather. That night, we meant to celebrate Jackson's promotion, and I was late because a client's campaign was stuck at the red light, called Almost. My phone buzzed with early metrics that looked like a sunrise open rates climbing engagement already 30% above what we'd hoped. I sent my mother a quick text, running 15 late. Her answer came back without a hello. "We've ordered appetizers. Try not to make a scene." The maitre d' led me past the glassed-in wine cellar and around a partition to the private room. The air smelled like seared meat and expensive cologne. Dad checked his watch the way a surgeon checks a pulse. Mom's smile hovered in the safe zone between polite and pleased. Jackson stood to hug me, and for a second I saw us at 13 and 15, his elbow nudging mine as we snuck an extra dinner roll like accomplices in a small, harmless crime. "Sorry I'm late," I said, easing into the empty chair. "Quarterly launch?" "It went live beautifully. How nice," Mom replied, the syllables stacked like coasters. Jackson was just telling us about his new team. 12 people, an 8-figure portfolio. The waiter poured more wine. Dad asked Jackson a question about headcount, and the conversation opened like a door I couldn't walk through. I tried again, later mentioning that my little firm had just won a regional hospitality award for a turnaround campaign. Mom pressed 2 fingers to the stem of her glass and said, the way you do when someone mentions the weather in a city you don't plan to visit." Halfway through the main course, I excused myself. The ladies' room at Harrington's is tucked down a hallway past the bourbon-tasting alcove where the lighting goes soft and the voices soften with it. I washed my hands longer than necessary, letting the water run until my shoulders dropped back into my body. On the way out, I heard my father's laugh. It's a particular sound, controlled, clipped for effect. He stood at the bar cart with my mother and Jackson swirling ice in a heavy glass. Whitney's still making excuses for that dead-end job, he was saying. At some point, we have to be realistic about her prospects. I stopped behind the decorative wine rack, the cool glass whispering against my sleeve. The hallway narrowed. My heartbeat was loud enough to feel like footsteps. "She seems to enjoy it," Jackson said, hesitant. Not embarrassed for me, not exactly, just tethered to the script. "Enjoyment doesn't build a legacy," Dad replied. "Your sister? She's worthless. She's done. 5 years out of college, and what does she have to show for it? A rented apartment and a title any communications major could land." I stared at the patterned carpet until the shapes blurred. My mother's voice slipped in like a draft. "Tom, lower your voice. Someone might hear you. Who cares if they do? It's the truth. We gave her every advantage. She squandered them on this creative nonsense." "What about her trust?" Jackson asked. "You said you were considering. I've spoken to Martin," Dad said. "We'll restructure. Bulk transfers will go to any future children. Education provisions. I don't trust her judgment." There was a pause long enough to fit my entire young life inside it. The art class, I didn't take the summer program I lost to tennis lessons, the way Mom fixed a stray hair behind my ear before parties, as if appearance could hold me together. Dad clinked his ice. "This is a course correction," he said, long overdue. Chairs shifted. I flattened into a shadowed corner as they moved past all 3 faces composed for company. My hands were shaking. A server brushed by with a tray and said, "Pardon me," and I startled like someone had called me by a name I didn't want anymore. Back at the table, I lifted my water glass and it clicked against the plate because my fingers wouldn't steady. Mom offered a thin smile. "Always working," she said. One would think, after 5 years, emergencies might be less constant. I nodded, because when you're bleeding and no one can see it, you learn to sit very still. Conversation resumed its performance. Dad praised Jackson's leadership style. Mom mentioned a charity board seat becoming available. Jackson described the corner office and the view of the harbor. I laughed at all the right places the way you do when you've learned a language you'll never speak fluently. When the desserts arrived, Dad stood and raised his glass. "To my son, who carries the Caldwell name forward with distinction." We clinked. My champagne tasted like metal. There's a particular quiet that falls when humiliation settles into the body. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's the sound of a door closing somewhere far down a hallway. A soft, final click. I felt it then, and the click echoed all the way home later, as I drove the dark ribbon of Storo headlights sliding along the Charles like white knives in black water. But that would come after. First, I had to sit in that room and let the last of the old story burn. People think injustice arrives with shouting. Sometimes it arrives with tidy diction and the scent of dry-aged beef. Sometimes it's served on warm plates and wiped up before anyone notices the stain. At that table, I saw the machinery that had run my family all my life, the ledger kept in my father's head, the social scoreboard in my mother's eyes, the way a son's success could make a daughter disappear. A house can be large, a table can be long, and you can still have no place to set down your heart. When the check came, in its little leather folder, Dad signed with the quick flourish of a man settling a simple matter. "We'll see Martin this week," he said to my mother, as if discussing lawn care. She nodded. Jackson pushed his chair back and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Proud of you," he said quietly, and I believed that he wanted to be. But belief doesn't stop a tide. It only keeps you standing a second longer before the pull. We stepped out beneath the awning. April air in Boston carries a cold that feels clean, like a new page that hasn't decided what will be written. The valet jogged off with our ticket. Dad checked his watch again. Mom pulled a wrap around her shoulders and stared down the length of the sidewalk, already somewhere else. I looked up at the hotel's lit windows, square after square of lives I would never know. On the drive home, I kept both hands at 10 and 2 like I learned at 16, a girl whose feet barely touched the pedals, who believed families were measured in tender things. The city moved beside me, brick and glass, the river shouldering the night. I thought of the spare room in my Somerville apartment, where my easel leaned against a wall canvas turned inward like a face avoiding eye contact. I thought of the client dashboard glowing on my laptop, early numbers pulsing like a small heart. By the time I turned onto my street, the porch lights were a line of quiet stars. Someone's TV flickered blue against their curtains. A neighbor's dog barked twice, then fell silent. I killed the engine and sat very still. Dad's words drifted back colder now that they had space to settle. Worthless. Done. The two of them fit in the palm of my hand like coins you put on a pair of eyes to keep them closed. I walked upstairs, heels in one hand, the other gripping the banister like a promise. Inside the apartment held its familiar small sounds, the hum of the fridge, the tick of an old wall clock, a radiator sighing like a tired friend. I set my bag on the kitchen counter and touched the cool rim of the sink, steadying myself. In the far room, a sliver of streetlight cut across the floorboards, thin as a blade. Some betrayals bloom into fury. This one sank like an anchor. It pulled me to the bottom where the water is quiet and clear, where you can finally see what sits on the ocean floor of your life. I stood there a long minute, the quiet pressing in the clock, counting each breath. Somewhere down the block, a car door shut. Somewhere in my chest, a door I hadn't noticed before swung open on silent hinges. I didn't step through it yet. I just stood in the doorway, listening. And in that stillness, bare feet on cool wood porch light, seeping under the shade, the taste of champagne turning flat on my tongue. I realized the night wasn't going to end the way nights usually did. It wasn't going to be washed away by sleep and smoothed over by morning. Something had shifted, and the house knew it before I did. That night, I didn't sleep. The city hummed outside my window, distant sirens, a late bus, turning on wet asphalt, the low whir of someone's television bleeding through the wall. I lay still, eyes open to the ceiling's faint glow. The sentence I'd overheard, "worthless done," kept replaying until it lost shape and became only sound. When dawn came, the first light spilled across the hardwood floor, and I sat up with the strange calm that comes after a long cry, though I hadn't cried at all. The coffee maker sputtered while I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. My reflection in the dark screen looked steady, but something behind it had changed. I clicked open my banking app and began transferring every shared dollar into the account that bore only my name. $3,028. Not much, but enough to mean I could breathe without asking permission. Then I opened a blank document and started a list. Independence plan. I wrote it like a prayer disguised as a to-do list, one line for every part of me that had been left waiting for permission to exist. By 2 a.m, I'd built a blueprint, pay off debt, save 6 months of expenses, apply for the senior strategist promotion, expand professional network outside my father's circle. I didn't know if it was bravery or exhaustion, but for once, I didn't need anyone to approve it. I stared at the screen until the cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Then, I picked up my phone and called the one person who'd always seen through the glossy family photos. Sophia answered on the 4th ring, her voice still thick with sleep. "Whit, it's the middle of the night. What's going on? I just found out what my family really thinks of me." My voice cracked the words heavier than I expected. I told her everything, every word I'd overheard, every moment that had suddenly rearranged itself into truth. When I finished, there was silence, the kind that holds both care and disappointment. "I've been waiting for you to see it," she said finally. "They've never valued who you are, only who you might make them look like." It was a sentence that could have sounded cruel from anyone else. From her, it sounded like clarity. "So what do I do now?" I asked. "You do what you should have done years ago," she said. "Build your life, not their version, yours." I could hear the faint smile in her voice even through the sleep. "And tomorrow, I'm coming over. We'll make this plan bulletproof. Then we'll toast to the new Whitney." The call ended, and I sat for a while watching the sky lighten to gray. I'd thought the worst night of my life had already happened, but maybe this was the first night of something better. By morning, I was wired with resolve. I brewed fresh coffee, showered, and logged onto my company portal. The job posting for senior strategist had been sitting there for a week. My cursor hovered, then clicked. Application submitted. That one motion felt like drawing a line through years of apology. The rest of the day passed in a blur of quiet determination. I set up a personal portfolio website, collected campaign results, and sent polite outreach emails to a handful of small businesses I'd met through networking events. By evening, I'd drafted 5 proposals offering discounted consulting services, side projects that might grow into something real. When Sophia arrived that night, she brought a bottle of wine and takeout from our favorite Thai place. We spread papers across my dining table, goals, budgets, drafts of my application, and the clutter looked like possibility. She helped me shape my talking points for the promotion review and calculate what I'd need to save to afford a better apartment in a year's time. Her confidence steadied mine. "You know what the best revenge will be?" she said, folding one of the lists neatly in half. "When they realize they have no power left. When you're happy, successful, and they can't take credit for any of it." I smiled for the first time in days. To success on my own terms. She raised her glass. To the Whitney who knows her worth. For the first time, I believed those words might be true. 3 months later, I stood by my office window, holding the letter that confirmed my promotion. Senior strategist. A 15% salary increase and 3 new accounts. The kind of win I'd once imagined presenting at a family dinner, waiting for the nod that never came. Instead, I texted Sophia dinner tonight. My treat. We went to a small Italian restaurant in the North End, the kind where the waiters knew your name if you came twice. We toasted with Prosecco, and I laughed until my cheeks hurt. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "That's nice, dear. And one from my father. Good to hear you're making progress." Jackson added a thumbs-up emoji. I turned the phone face down and left it there. In the months that followed, my world expanded in quiet, deliberate ways. My side business, which I'd named Caldwell Creative Solutions, found its first steady clients, 2 small cafes, a florist, and a local bookstore that needed a marketing overhaul. Each contract was modest, but the autonomy felt rich. I spent weekends designing campaigns, learning new tools, building invoices. My dining table disappeared beneath a forest of color swatches and notebooks. Missing 2 family dinners in a row didn't go unnoticed. My mother texted first, "The Harringtons were asking about you. You should have come." My father followed with family obligations, take precedence over distractions. "Your absence reflects poorly on all of us." Jackson's message came softer. "Everything okay?" "They're upset, but I get it if you're busy." I typed back, "Just focused on work," and left it at that. The truth was simpler. Being near them felt like wearing a coat lined with thorns. By midsummer, I faced a new challenge. My lease was ending, and Boston rents had climbed like ivy. Without the family account to fall back on, I'd have to share. Through a coworker, I met Jasmine, a graphic designer with a calm voice and a laugh that came easily. She needed a roommate within the month. Over coffee, we compared notes on art, long work hours, and bad landlords. By the second cup, we'd agreed to move in together. Moving day arrived under the July sun that sticks to your skin. Sophia brought boxes and lemonade. Jasmine brought her brother and his pickup truck. By sunset, we sat among half-assembled furniture, eating pizza straight from the box. Jasmine raised her plastic cup. To new beginnings and no passive-aggressive post-it notes. I laughed lighter than I'd felt in a long time. The new apartment was small but filled with afternoon light. Outside, kids shouted from the sidewalk, and somewhere down the block, music drifted from a porch. Jamaica Plain was alive in a way Wellesley never had been. I felt for the first time that I belonged somewhere. The summer blurred into work deadlines and the hum of the fan that never quite cooled the room. I started sleeping 5 hours a night, juggling client calls and campaign drafts. When the email from a potential new client arrived, a regional restaurant chain, I poured every ounce of energy into the pitch. But halfway through the presentation, my hands began to tremble. The room tilted, the words on my slides swimming. I managed to finish, but afterward, I locked myself in the restroom and sat on the cold tile until my heartbeat slowed. The client still signed the contract. Success on paper. But my body felt like it had been sending warnings I'd ignored for too long. That night, I called Sophia, voice breaking, halfway through the first sentence. "I can't keep this up. Maybe my father was right." "Stop," she said. Her tone cut through the panic. "You're not failing. You're burning out." "There's a difference." She came over within an hour. We sat on the couch, surrounded by papers and takeout containers, her pen tapping softly against the side of her notebook as she helped me sort through priorities. We trimmed my client list, pushed deadlines, and built a real schedule, one that left time for sleep, for rest, for being human again. Jasmine overheard and leaned against the doorway. "If you ever need design support, I can help," she offered. "Half price. Maybe it'll help both of us." I hesitated, instinctively protective of my independence, but I saw the sincerity in her smile and nodded. "Deal." Collaboration had always looked like weakness in my family, but here it felt like breathing. Within weeks, our partnership lifted both of us. Her portfolio grew, my workload eased, and our apartment filled with the quiet sound of keyboards and shared playlists. By fall, my world had shifted again. I'd started meeting new people through Jasmine's design network: painters, photographers, writers, people who introduced themselves without last names or business cards. Among them was James Porter, a former colleague who now worked for a tech company downtown. He reached out about a possible collaboration, but when we met for coffee, conversation spilled beyond work. We spoke about books, travel, and the strange pressure of being raised by parents who measured success like oxygen. "My father had my life planned before I could walk," James said, stirring his coffee. "Harvard-Stanford law firm." I made it halfway, then realized I hated it. "What happened?" I asked. "Got disowned. Then I built a company they couldn't ignore." I smiled faintly. Maybe success really is the universal language. He laughed, the sound easy and warm. "Maybe, but peace is better." As the weeks passed, we met again, sometimes for projects, sometimes just to talk. His calm steadiness reminded me that success didn't have to be loud. By October, 6 months after the night that changed everything, I had reached most of the goals on my independence plan. My emergency fund could cover 3 months. My side business earned enough to pay my half of the rent comfortably. I'd built a circle of friends who knew me as Whitney, not as Thomas Caldwell's daughter. Each client approval and new connection stitched something back inside me. I was no longer the girl hiding behind polite smiles at a mahogany table. One crisp morning, as I walked to the train through leaves the color of copper, I realized the impossible had happened. I was content. I didn't need their recognition. I didn't need their money. And that, I thought, was the quietest and strongest victory of all. That evening, I came home to find an envelope on the kitchen counter. It was thick ivory paper with my mother's handwriting across the front. Inside was a single line: "Your father has reserved Harrington's again this Thursday. Jackson's partnership announcement. Please confirm your attendance. The same restaurant, the same table, 1 year to the week." I stood at the counter for a long time, letter open in my hand, the room filling with the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Jasmine's laughter drifting from the next room. It felt like the world had curved back to its beginning, but this time I was not the same woman walking in. I set the letter on the counter and stared at the handwriting until the lines blurred. My mother's script had always been elegant, a perfect loop and slant, the kind taught in finishing schools and thank you notes. Even now, she could make a command sound like an invitation. I folded the note once, then twice, and slipped it into the drawer beside the stove. Jasmine was in the living room sorting through color proofs spread across the coffee table. She looked up when she noticed my expression. "Bad news," I held up the folded note. "Family dinner. Harrington's. Same place as last year." Her brow furrowed. "That's the one?" "Yes," I said, quietly. "The one?" She hesitated, then nodded, as if she understood more than I had said. "Are you going?" "I think I have to," I said. "Not for them. For me." That night, I texted Sophia. She called immediately, her voice steady, no surprise in it. "It's time, isn't it?" she said. "It feels like it." "Then go." She told me. "But go as the woman you've become, not the daughter they remember." Thursday arrived cold and bright, the kind of April evening when the wind still bites through a coat. I spent an hour standing in front of my closet before choosing the red dress I'd bought for a client event months earlier. It was simple, strong, the color of confidence. My reflection didn't look like the girl who once sat silent at that table, hoping to be seen. Sophia came over before I left, carrying a paper cup of chamomile tea instead of wine. She sat on the edge of my counter, watching as I fastened my earrings. "Remember," she said gently, "you don't owe them anything, not a smile, not an explanation." I smiled at her through the mirror. "I'm not going there to prove a point. I'm going to close one." When I pulled up to Harrington's, twilight had settled over the harbor. The same valet, or maybe just the same uniform, stepped forward. Inside, the smell of cedar and buttered steak was the same too, only I felt different walking through it. The maitre d' recognized me and led me to the private dining room. My family looked up as I entered. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother rose, lips curved in that social smile that never reached her eyes. "Whitney, darling, you look vibrant tonight." "Thank you," I said. "You look well." My father stood, offering a brief hug that felt more like a transaction than an embrace. "You made it," he said, surprised, as though he hadn't expected I would. "We were just discussing Jackson's new partnership." I turned to my brother. "Congratulations," I said sincerely. Whatever else had happened, His success was real. We sat, and the familiar rhythm began the waiter's quiet steps, the gleam of silver under soft light, my parents filling the air with talk of markets, charity boards, the right people knowing the right things. It all felt like a play I'd already seen. Then I noticed the extra place setting at the end of the table. "Are we expecting someone else?" I asked. My father didn't look up from his menu. "Martin will be joining us briefly. A few family matters to address after dinner." My chest tightened. I knew what family matters meant. The trust. The conversation I wasn't meant to have heard. The symmetry of it all was almost absurd 1 year later. The same restaurant, the same table, and now the reckoning. Dinner began with the usual polished small talk. My mother asked if I was still at that little marketing agency. I met her gaze evenly. "Actually, I'm now a senior strategy director, and my client portfolio has expanded quite a bit." "That's nice, dear," she said, turning back to my brother. "Jackson, tell your sister about your new office view." Her dismissal no longer stung. It merely confirmed what I already knew. I sipped my wine, unbothered. Halfway through the meal, my father finally turned his attention to me. "Your brother mentioned you've been busy. I trust the position compensates you well enough for all those missed family dinners." Before I could answer, my mother added lightly, "You know, Abigail Peterson's daughter also works in marketing. She just bought a lovely condo in Back Bay. Perhaps you two should connect. She might know of openings at more established firms." "My current opportunities are excellent," I said. "At the agency and with my own company." My father set down his fork. "Your own company?" "Yes," I said. "Caldwell Creative Solutions. We handle marketing for small and mid-sized businesses." He blinked clearly, caught off guard. My team and I said. 5 contractors now with clients in 3 states. My mother looked confused, her voice almost scolding. "When did you have time to start a business? Why wouldn't you tell your father? He could have guided you." "I found good advisors," I said, "and I've managed well." My father leaned back slightly, studying me, as if trying to locate the familiar daughter beneath this unfamiliar calm. "Entrepreneurship runs in the Caldwell blood," he said finally. "Perhaps you're finding your footing at last. With the right guidance, this side project could become substantial." "It already is," I said quietly. "We're projecting 6-figure revenue this year." Jackson let out a low whistle before catching himself. My father's expression flickered surprise, then calculation. He wasn't used to being out of control of the narrative. "You might have mentioned this sooner," he said. "Family businesses have always been part of our legacy." My mother tried to recover the moment, turning toward him. "Did you see that article about Whitney in Boston Business Monthly, Tom? They featured her in their Rising Marketing Stars section." I looked at her startled. "You read it?" "Of course," she said, though her tone was uncertain. Jackson nodded. "It was impressive, Whit. They mentioned your restaurant campaign. Very creative work." I smiled at him. "Thank you." My father cleared his throat. "Well, perhaps our guidance has had some effect after all." That was the moment. The old reflex would have been to let it pass, to accept the crumb as a meal. But something steadier rose instead. "Actually," I said, setting down my glass, "it wasn't guidance that changed things. It was clarity." The air at the table shifted the way it does before a storm. My mother's smile froze. My father's brows drew together. "I sat at this table a year ago," I said, my voice even. "That night, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. You called me worthless. You said I was done, and you discussed how to keep my trust fund out of my reach." My mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "Whitney, you must have misunderstood." "The context was clear," I said. "And I'm grateful for it." "Grateful." My father's tone was sharp. "Yes," I said, Because that night forced me to stop chasing approval that was never going to come. Everything I've built this year, my promotion, my business, my independence, I did it without your help, without your money, without your name. You were wrong about me. My father's face reddened. You've misinterpreted a moment of frustration, he said stiffly. Parents have concerns. We discuss them privately. That doesn't give you the right to make accusations. I'm not accusing, I said quietly. I'm stating facts. He looked ready to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. And I'm not angry anymore, I continued, just grateful to finally understand where I stand. My mother's voice softened, rehearsed calm, layered over panic. We've always wanted what's best for you. What's best for the family image, I said. But that's fine. I understand it now. What I need if there's going to be any relationship left is respect. The silence that followed was heavy, like a curtain dropping. Then Jackson spoke, his voice quiet but steady. She's right. We haven't treated her fairly. I should have said something that night, and I didn't. I'm sorry, Whit. For a second, I saw the boy who used to cover for me when I was late for curfew. I nodded to him, grateful but not undone. My father turned on him sharply. This isn't about taking sides. It's not about sides, I said, standing. It's about truth. And the truth is, I'm not the failure you thought I was. I set my napkin beside my plate. I think it's best if I leave before Martin arrives. You can send any paperwork through my attorney. Whitney, my mother, said, her voice rising. Don't be dramatic. Sit down. I'm not being dramatic, I said, meeting her eyes. I'm being clear. Setting boundaries isn't drama, it's respect. I looked at Jackson. Congratulations again. You earned it. Then I turned and walked out. The corridor outside was dim and quiet, the hum of conversation fading behind me. When I stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold air wrapped around me like something clean. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in a year. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to a small overlook above the harbor where the city lights shimmered against the dark water. I called Sophia. Well, she said. I told them everything I said, a breath of laughter caught between relief and disbelief. And how do you feel? I looked out at the skyline, the glass towers reflecting back the lights of a city that had no idea my life had just shifted again. Like I can finally breathe, I said. I stayed there for a long time, watching the lights ripple on the water. The air smelled of salt and cold metal. The world felt open again, unfamiliar, but mine. And for the first time, I didn't feel small when I thought of my family. I felt free. The city woke slowly the next morning, gray light falling through the blinds like a quiet verdict. I hadn't slept much. The conversation from the night before looped in fragments, my father's disbelief, my mother's trembling voice, Jackson's apology. Every sound from Harrington's still lived in my head, the scrape of a chair, the soft chime of glass, the pause before I stood up. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but the feeling was different. It wasn't victory, it was release. Something heavy had shifted, leaving behind an ache that wasn't painful anymore, just empty. 3 days passed before the first message came. My father sent a short email. His tone was businesslike, the language careful. He'd instructed his attorney to forward me the trust fund modifications. Review with your own counsel if you wish. The door remains open for future discussion when emotions have settled. Business opportunities often emerge from unexpected sources. Even in written form, it sounded like him, an olive branch disguised as a transaction. I read it twice, then filed it away in a folder marked family. My mother's approach came softer. Texts one after another, pretending nothing had happened. There's a new exhibit at the MFA. Perhaps we could go together. Another a few days later, I made a reservation at Bistro Claude next week, just us girls. I didn't answer the first few, but each one arrived like a knock on a door I hadn't decided whether to open. Jackson was different. He called instead of writing. His voice carried none of the usual polish, just a tired kind of honesty. "You were right," he said, "about all of it." I keep thinking about how easily I went along with them. There was no defense in his tone, no excuse. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you think. I've been questioning everything lately," he admitted. "My career, the choices I made because Dad expected them. I'm not sure how much of what I'm doing is really mine." It was the first time I'd heard doubt in him, and it softened something in me I hadn't realized was still sharp. "It's disorienting at first," I told him, "but once you start asking what you actually want, it gets clearer. Not easier, but clearer." He exhaled a quiet, unguarded sound. That's the first real advice anyone in this family has given me. We talked for nearly an hour about work childhood, the strange comfort of starting over. When I hung up, I felt lighter. For the first time, the word family didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a window cracked open just enough for air to move through. A week later, a call came that I didn't expect. A man introduced himself as Alexander Weiss, a partner at Meridian Investments, my father's firm. His tone was courteous, but deliberate. "I'd like to discuss a potential professional opportunity, Miss Caldwell," he said. I assumed it was some kind of misunderstanding. "You're aware that Thomas Caldwell is my father?" I asked carefully. "I am," he said. "This isn't at his suggestion." "Quite the opposite, in fact." "May we meet for coffee tomorrow morning?" Curiosity outweighed caution. The next day I met him at a quiet cafe in the financial district, the kind where the chairs creak but the coffee's perfect. He looked to be in his late 50s, silver hair, clear eyes, the kind of man who carried his success without flashing it. He didn't waste time. "I've known your father for 30 years, he said. "We started at Meridian together. I respect his achievements, but I'm concerned about some of the risks he's taken recently." He watched my face, measuring my reaction. I stayed still. "Why tell me this?" "Because the firm is restructuring. Some senior partners will be moved into advisory roles. Your father is among them, though he doesn't know yet. And because I've seen your work." He paused, leaning back. "That article in Boston Business Monthly came across my desk. Your campaigns impressed me. Meridian needs fresh direction in client communications. We'd like to hire your agency." I blinked. "You're aware that might be complicated," I am, which is why this conversation stays between us for now. "The committee has already approved a preliminary budget. You'll report directly to me, not to him." It was the kind of offer that could transform a small firm overnight. "Why me?" I asked quietly. He smiled slightly. "Because your father dismissed the idea when another partner mentioned it. That made me look closer. What I found was someone building something honest without shortcuts. We could use that." When he left, I sat for a long time with my coffee growing cold. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd called me worthless had just helped secure the biggest opportunity of my career. Over the following weeks, whispers about Meridian's restructuring reached every corner of the financial district. I didn't need inside information. The city's rumor mill did the work. Jackson confirmed that our father had been tense, snapping at colleagues working longer hours. My mother mentioned they were simplifying their life, selling the Berkshire's house, cutting back on events. The words she used were tidy, but I could hear the strain behind them. Meanwhile, my own company thrived. The Meridian contract passed its ethics review, and within a month, we began work. My team grew to 7, and the new office buzzed with energy that didn't need permission to exist. I found purpose in the long hours in building something that felt rooted in truth. James Porter, now a steady part of my days, became both mentor and something more. Our coffee meetings turned into dinners. Dinners turned into quiet evenings that didn't need filling with words. He had the kind of calm that doesn't have to prove itself. "There's something freeing about walking away from their expectations," he said one night over pasta. "You start hearing your own voice again." "I'm still learning to trust mine," I admitted. "That's the best part," he said. "You don't have to know yet. You just have to keep listening." By late summer, I'd found a rhythm that felt like living. Work friends loved the pieces didn't compete anymore. They fit. Then in September, an unexpected message arrived from the marketing director of a regional financial services firm. Meridian had bid on their rebranding project, and so had we. Weeks later, she called to tell me their decision. "We were impressed by both proposals," she said. "But your team's approach showed a deeper understanding of emerging investors. We're moving forward with Caldwell Creative." When I hung up, I stared at my phone for a long moment. I'd just won a contract against my father's firm. That evening, Jackson texted me. "He's pretending it doesn't matter, but it does. Congratulations, Whit." I smiled at the screen, not with pride, but with quiet recognition of how far I'd come. By fall, the pieces of my life looked nothing like the version my parents once curated. My business employed 15 people. The agency promoted me again, this time to creative director. I moved into a light-filled apartment in Cambridge, no roommate required. My relationship with my family had settled into something more distant but manageable. My father sent occasional emails about legacy planning, phrased like memos. My mother invited me to luncheons I politely declined. Jackson, though, had changed. He'd taken a leave from the firm exploring teaching opportunities. When we met for dinner one evening, he looked younger, somehow lighter. "They can't comprehend it," he said, shaking his head. "That I'd walk away from finance. Mom keeps sending listings. Dad calls it a midlife crisis." "What do you call it?" I asked. He smiled. "Starting over." We finished our meal talking about everything but the past. When he walked me to my car, he said, "You know you set the example, even if they'll never admit it." It was a sentence that stayed with me long after he'd gone. Winter came early that year, soft snow layering the sidewalks. In December, the Boston Business Journal released its annual 40 Under 40 list. My name was there, printed in quiet black letters. I read the profile twice, surprised at how little it mattered. The line that did matter was the quote they pulled from our interview. "Success isn't measured by living up to others' expectations, but by having the courage to define your own." When the issue arrived at my office, my assistant pinned it to the bulletin board with a small smile. "For inspiration," she said. I thanked her and let it hang there, not as proof, but as a reminder of the silence that had once been filled with someone else's judgment. 2 years after the night at Harrington's, I stood in the sunlight of my new office, a converted industrial floor with exposed brick and tall windows that looked out toward the harbor. My team was unpacking boxes, laughter echoing off the walls. Lily, my assistant, handed me a stack of mail. "Last of the address changes," she said. "Oh, and this one came by courier." The envelope was cream-colored, my parents' return address, printed neatly in gold. Inside was a card, "Family gathering this Sunday, Wellesley." Beneath it, a short handwritten note from my mother. "Your father and I have news to share. Your presence would mean a great deal to us." I turned it over once, then set it on my desk beside the morning light. I didn't feel dread, just a quiet curiosity. After everything, they still wanted an audience. That evening I called Jackson. Did you get the invitation? He sighed. Yeah, they're selling the house, downsizing to Cambridge. Dad's move to advisory is official now. How's he handling it? Badly, Jackson said. He's trying to reframe it as strategy. Mom's pretending it was their idea all along. He paused. But honestly, I think they want you there. Things have shifted since you set those boundaries. I leaned back in my chair, the city lights flickering against the glass. I'll think about it, I said. The decision wasn't simple. Walking into that house meant facing everything I'd outgrown. But some part of me knew it was time to see the end of that story too. After all, it wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about seeing them clearly and deciding at last what stayed and what I could finally let go. Sunday arrived with the kind of stillness that only early winter mornings can hold. The city was wrapped in pale, light rooftops dusted with the thin shimmer of overnight frost. I sat by the window with my coffee cooling between my hands, watching the street below wake in small motions. Dog walkers, bundled in scarves. The quiet scrape of a shovel on the sidewalk. The slow breath of life returning to the day. The invitation to Wellesley lay on the counter, half buried beneath a stack of project proofs. I'd looked at it every morning since it came, waiting for some inner voice to tell me what to do. That morning, there was no voice, just calm. I slipped the card into my coat pocket before locking the door behind me. The drive felt shorter than it used to. Maybe because I wasn't carrying the same weight. The highway wound through fields faded to gold trees, bare and graceful against a cold blue sky. I parked by the old stone wall and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing in the familiarity that no longer hurt. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The shutters had lost some of their shine, and a for sale sign leaned slightly in the wind at the end of the drive. Through the tall windows, I could see my mother setting a vase of winter roses on the table, her movements slower now. When she opened the door, she smiled carefully. You came. I nodded. I did. She stepped aside to let me in, and for a moment I caught the scent of the house, the faint perfume of lemon polish and lavender detergent exactly as it had always been. The air was warm, quieter than I remembered, like the house itself had softened. My father stood near the fireplace, his suit traded for a gray sweater, his posture less rigid than before. Jackson leaned against the doorway, hands in his pockets, relief flickering across his face when he saw me. We didn't want to surprise you, my father began, but we're moving into a smaller place next month. Cambridge near the park. Your mother wanted to tell you herself. I looked around the living room, the framed family photos, the piano no one played anymore, the echo of decades spent performing happiness. It's a good decision, I said gently. He nodded, eyes downcast, the silence between us heavier than pride could carry. My mother gestured toward the table. We made lunch. Nothing fancy, roast chicken salad. You used to love the way it made the house smell. The words landed softly like a peace offering wrapped in memory. I followed her into the dining room. The table was smaller now too, no centerpieces, no polished silver. Just simple plates and the warmth of something trying to heal. Jackson poured water into glasses. Dad and I packed most of the study, he said, looking at me. Found some of your old sketches, the city ones. I smiled faintly. You kept those? They were too good to throw out, he said. I think you were the only one of us who saw the world in color back then. We ate quietly. Conversation moved slowly the way light does through a dusty room. My mother asked about my company, about the new office by the harbor. She listened not for an opening to correct or compare, but to understand. My father said little, but when he did, his voice lacked its old precision. I read your interview, he said at last. In the journal. Your comment about defining success, it was insightful. Thank you, I said. I meant it. He nodded, and something in his expression loosened. For the first time, I saw not authority or pride, but a man coming to terms with his own fragility. After lunch, my mother insisted we take a walk around the garden. The roses were long gone, leaving only bare stems and the promise of spring. She buttoned her coat, her voice trembling slightly in the cold. I used to believe keeping things perfect meant keeping them safe, she said. But I see now it only made everything fragile. I glanced at her, unsure how to respond. She looked older, yes, but also more human, less polished, more real. We can't fix the past, I said quietly. But we can stop carrying it like a debt. She reached for my hand. I'd like that. For a moment, we stood in the brittle sunlight, the air sharp but gentle. Then she smiled and said, "You look happy, Whitney." I am, I said. I finally built a life that feels like mine. When I left that afternoon, my father walked me to the door. The handshake he offered was awkward, but when I pulled him into a hug instead, he didn't resist. "You've done well," he said, voice low. "Better than I imagined. I suppose we should have trusted you sooner." I met his eyes. It's all right. I trust myself now. That's what matters. The drive home passed beneath a golden sky. I didn't look in the rearview mirror much. Some things don't need watching as they fade. They just need peace. Winter slid quietly into spring. Work filled my days, but it no longer consumed them. James and I moved into a small townhouse near the river, the kind with uneven floors and morning light that poured through lace curtains. On weekends, we cooked late breakfasts, walked through farmers' markets, and laughed about the life neither of us had expected to find. One evening, he found me on the back porch, sketchbook in hand. The sun was melting into the water, painting the sky in soft tangerine. He sat beside me, his shoulder warm against mine. "Do you ever think about them?" he asked. "Sometimes," I said, "but not with anger anymore, just distance." He nodded. "That's how you know it's over, the part that hurt." I smiled. Maybe it's not over. Maybe it's just finally quiet. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the smell of river mud and early blossoms. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing a saxophone, a slow, wandering tune that made the air feel alive. I rested my head against James's shoulder and let the sound wash through me. That night before bed, I wrote a short note and taped it to the inside of my sketchbook. "Remember, you were never done. You were becoming." Months later, Jackson came to visit. He looked happier, freer. Over coffee, he told me he'd accepted a teaching position in Vermont. "I think I'm going to stay there a while," he said. "Smaller paycheck, bigger peace." I laughed softly. "That sounds familiar?" He smiled. "You taught me it's okay to start again, even after all the noise." When he left, he hugged me longer than usual. "You did it, Whit," he said. "You changed the story for all of us." I didn't answer. I just watched him walk down the path until the sound of his footsteps disappeared into the spring air. Later that evening, Sophia stopped by with wine and a stack of magazines. We sat by the window, watching the lights flicker across the river. "You know what I love most about you now," she said. "You don't have to prove anything anymore. You just are." Her words settled into the quiet like a final note. I reached for her hand. "It took long enough," I said. We laughed softly, the kind of laughter that lives somewhere between relief and joy. The night ended the way I love most, slow music, open windows, the smell of rain beginning to fall. I turned off the lights and stood at the window, watching droplets race down the glass. The city beyond shimmered in silver streaks, alive and soft. Peace doesn't always come as a grand arrival. Sometimes it slips in quietly through the spaces left open by letting go. For years, I thought revenge would look like triumph. But it turned out to look like this calm morning's honest work people who stay because they want to, not because they're supposed to. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not a finish line, but a homecoming. If this story found you at the right moment, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever had to rebuild your peace from the pieces someone else left behind, share this with someone who'll understand. Thank you for being here, for listening, for feeling, for believing in quiet strength and second chances.